Welcome to the Charter Oak Chess Club's YouTube channel, and in today's video, we're looking at a game played by Adolf Anderssen with the black pieces. We're going to try to guess each one of his moves, and by doing this, we're going to get a better understanding of his game.
So Jean Defresne has the white pieces and Adolf Anderssen has the black pieces, and the game starts out with pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to c4. I didn't make us guess these moves because, of course, in the opening, there's a lot of choices we could play. We could have played a Sicilian, we could have played the French defense, but they've gone into this Italian game so far. So what would black play here? Try to guess the next move. All right, so in the game, Adolf Anderssen went for knight to f6, but of course you could also play bishop c5 and decide to go into the Gioco piano. Either one of these are fine. In this position, white played pawn to d4 and kind of turning it into a scotch. And what did black play here? All right, so in this position, black played e takes on d4, and that's really the only option that makes sense. Pretty much anytime you have e4, e5, and d4 comes onto the board, whether it's center game or the scotch, you're going to have to take that pawn. You're going to have to take that pawn in the center. If we tried to take the e pawn, this wouldn't make any sense because after white recaptures, black's knight on e4 is kind of in the middle of nowhere and is going to have to retreat. And if I look at white's pieces, they're very well placed, very normal position. We're ready to castle, get our other bishop into the game. So this wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. There's a lot of ways to go wrong here. So for example, we could play, if we played something like pawn to d6, they can already sacrifice the bishop, and then the king comes to take, and then we have check, and we have a fork. So there's a lot of ways that white can really get back into the game here. Bishop c5 would also be really bad. Bishop c5, we'd go for queen to d5 right away. And again, we're threatening checkmate. We're going to pick up the knight, or we're going to pick up the bishop if the knight moves away. So there's a lot of ways for this to go wrong, and it just doesn't make any sense. So if you're ever in this position, always take. So e takes on d4, and white decides to push e5. And so we have a Scotch gambit now, and this is kind of the idea to give up a pawn temporarily, but we're also going to get some tempo. So what did black play in this position? Okay, so there's a few options here. In the game, black decided to play pawn to d5. And this move is probably a little bit surprising if you never played the Scotch. I know I had to learn it by watching, I think it was Magnus versus Hikaru. And this is just a very common idea. When they push, you play d5. And this looks a little scary, but if capture and then capture, black is simply up a pawn here. And it looks a little scary if they take over here, but again, we recapture and we realize, wow, we have the center, we got the knight and bishop out. Yeah, our castle's a little bit broken, but it's really no big deal. We're up a pawn, our position's good, we got good development. We can even go over here and play queen to e7, getting check. And the nice thing about that is if the queen moves here, we simply trade off queens, and that's the biggest threat. And we take the pawn back, and again, we're up a pawn. And yeah, we have double pawns here on the c-file, but they're connected. It's just a very good position for black. So yeah, d5 is kind of a hard one to find, but it's a good one to know. If they take en passant, we can capture with the bishop, so that's no problem. So there's a lot of good ways to go about this. But there are other options. One other option that black could play is knight to g4. Now, if you play knight to g4, you have to calculate a bunch of lines, and one of them is if bishop takes f7. This will work for black, but if you're going to go into this line, then you should have hopefully calculated this move. So we sack the bishop, and then afterwards, the knight comes to play check, and it's defended by the bishop, so the queen can't take. So the king would have to go back here, and now the queen picks up the knight for free, and we play h6 to try to kick the knight. So you would have to have kind of seen this and evaluated that black is going to be better in this position. And they are, simply because that e5 pawn is going to be a little tricky to hold on to, and black's going to get some tempo here. Like if this knight hops back, it seems like everything's fine, but you could play pawn to d6, right? Bishop attacks, and now we have pawn and knight attacking the pawn. So there's a few things that we could play here as black to get an initiative. Long story short, it's very complicated. That's only one of the lines that they could go into. So if you're going to play knight to g4, you should really take the time to calculate all the tactics that are going to happen. It's much easier to play pawn to d5, grab the center. White did not want to take because we saw that black would simply be up a pawn, so they played bishop to b5, pinning the knight. And now what would you do here if you were playing as black? Okay, so after this move, the bishop is no longer attacked, but our knight on f6 is attacked, so we have to do something with that, right? And in this case, maybe knight to d7 is okay, but the best move, and the one that Adolf Anderssen played, was knight to e4. Centralizing the knight, it's defended by the pawn, just makes the most sense. And now white decided to castle. And what would you play here as black? So you have some options, right? We got two bishops we need to develop. Nothing's really being attacked. I mean, we have this pin, but it's not doing anything right now. We can simply take back with the pawn. So it makes the most sense for us to simply develop, right? So in the game, we saw bishop to c5, and this really should not be a surprising move, because if I had to choose between the two bishops to develop, I'm going to play bishop to c5 so I can castle kingside. All right, so in this position, white played pawn to b4. Maybe it's just better for the knight to take on d4, but b4 is kind of a fun move, kind of like the Evans gambit, where when you take this pawn, white gets some easy development afterwards, kind of kicking the bishop off that square. It was kind of unnecessary. What would you play here as black? So in the game, black just simply played bishop to b6. We're not interested in that pawn because our bishop's very well placed, attacking the center, also going to pin the f-pawn to the king once this pawn is removed. So bishop b6 makes a lot of sense versus capturing a pawn that, let's face it, our opponent wants us to capture. So white simply decides, well, I'm down a pawn. Let's fix that. Knight takes on d4. And what would you play here as black? All right, so here's a key move. We are getting attacked twice, and we're only defending once, so we have to do something with this. If we choose to take over here, then the queen can simply take, because this knight is still pinned. And again, we really like this bishop. It's doing pretty well, so the move that we should have found, bishop to d7, get your fourth minor piece out, and now we're ready to castle. Capture, what would you play here as black? All right, so we capture with the pawn here. If we capture with the bishop, because we don't want to get double pawns, well, it's too bad because guess what? We're going to get double pawns anyways, right? And also my bishop would be looking at my own pawn, which is not what we want. So it makes sense to take with the pawn, and now both my bishops are going this way, and the queen's going this way, and I got the knight here. So the bishops are very well placed. I have the bishop pair. My opponent does not have a bishop pair. They only have one bishop. So we're going to take with the b-pawn. Okay, so next move for white, pawn to f4. And now I want you to really pause the video. You know, we should have been taking our time this whole video, but let's take our time here and try to figure out what did black play. All right, so this is the move of the game. This is the fun tactic, so really wanted to take our time here. f3 would have been the best move for white. Simply kick the knight out of the way. When we play f4, we have an outpost now, so the knight's very happy. And we can play this very fun move, bishop to g4. So you're attacking the queen. And whenever you're looking through a Grandmaster game and there's like a crazy move, it's like, what? Okay, my queen just takes. Let's play it out on the board and see what happens. So queen takes bishop, and white's up 3 points. But now we can take this knight because nothing's defending it. And now we have a fork. So we're even right now, but once this king moves away, now we're up by 5 points. I mean, yeah, we're going to lose a pawn, but no big deal. So white can't allow that to happen, so they play queen to d3, right? Which makes sense. It's really the only square the queen can go to where it still defends the knight, because we can't go to d2 because the knight's attacking. So what did black play in this position? All right, so right here, probably my favorite move of the game, bishop to e2. It's very nice. The knight cannot take because it is pinned. And again, if the queen takes, capture, and now again, black is going up 5 points because of the fork. So white really has no choice but to move their queen again, and they move it to e3, and now we're simply going to, well, I should have let you guess, but we're simply going to take this rook, and then the king takes, and now we're up 2 points, which should be enough to win the game, but the last few moves are a little fancy as well. So try to figure out what would black play in this position. All right, so in the game, black played queen to h4. It's worth noting there are quite a few moves that black could play. But queen to h4, I think, practically makes the most sense, right? You have 2 pieces. You need to get your 3rd piece in to try to finish the game, right? To try to threaten checkmate, to try to attack the castle. Just bring the queen in, and you have plenty of time to castle because you're not being attacked anytime soon. And if you guess on any of these moves, bishop takes knight, that's never the right way to go because this bishop is doing so much with this pin. So whenever you have a pin, just keep this bishop here. Keep the bishop pinning. So queen to h4, and white played bishop to b2, which was actually a pretty good move by Jean Defresne here, because we would have thought, well, I'm clearly attacking your pawn on h2. Why don't you just move your pawn on h2? Well, try to figure out what would we play here if this was the case. So if they move h2 to h3, they save the pawn, but now we can attack the king because this square on g3 is left open. So we're going to play knight to g3 check, and the king can't stay or go to e2, and if it goes to either of these squares, doesn't matter which one, we're going to bring the knight to f5 with a discovered attack, also attacking the queen. If the queen tries to block, take, and you already guessed it, we're going to make use of this fork again, check, king moves away, take, we'd be up 10 points here, it's completely game over. So, can't do that. And if the king tried to run into the corner here, again, this bishop is going to take first and get a fork. But now we're going to use a different fork. So it's not about the bishop so much in this line. It's about sacking the bishop so that we can get this knight fork. And again, the queen can't move away because if the queen tries to move away, it's pinned, right? So they kind of have to take. So both of those tactics come from h2 to h3. So even though Jean Defresne was losing this game, I like that he put up a fight and said, wait, I can't really do that. Let me go with bishop b2. And now, again, you can get some move for black. Okay, this one's not too hard. We're just going to take on h2 and get closer to getting some checks. White develops their last piece. And now what would you play here as black? So we're trying to end the game, so we're going to go after the king, right? Queen to h1 check. The king only has 1 move. What would you play here as black? Okay, so we have a discovered attack when the king moves away, and the rook is defended by the bishop. So the queen plays take and continues to check the king. What would you play here as white? Yeah, we have to keep running. And now we are winning the game, right? We're +4. White should resign. We're going to win the game. But try to think of a way to checkmate the king quickly in these next upcoming moves. What would you play here as black? Okay, so black's next move was knight takes on d2. And now white has to recapture. And now what does black play? We're trying to go after the king. So the idea of just trading these knights was so that we could play queen to e4 check. And again, the king has to keep moving, right? And now this is probably one of the trickier questions. What does black play here? The king looks like it's escaping. What can we play? All right, so in the game, black played pawn to c5, and c5 attacks the knight. If the knight moves away, we have checkmate. So because of that, white decides to take on c5. What would you do if you were playing as black here? All right, so, don't play fast, don't take the pawn back. We play bishop to a5, and that was it. That was the whole game. So we could just stop here, and then we could say, well, if the king moves away, we just take the queen, right? And that is enough to win because you would be up 12 points here. You're gonna crush it. But again, if we were trying to go for checkmate and this game continued, what would we do? We would say, well, the queen's doing a good job, bishop's doing a good job, pawn's doing a good job. We need to get another piece in here. Rook to b8. So rook to b8 is even better. We try to force the king into the corner. And then when we take, the rook is attacking the bishop. If they try to defend, we can go capture, 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 and it's going to be checkmate very, very soon here. If they ever try to go over here, there's our mate. And if they run over here, we can simply just bring in more pieces. One of those pieces would be castling, right? We finally take the opportunity to castle, make sure we don't get back rank mate, and we can use the ladder method, bring in the rook and the queen. So I hope you enjoyed this game, and this idea of trying to guess the next move really makes it a bit more interesting because you get to learn a bit about openings, a bit about tactics, and more importantly, just the ideas that both these grandmasters were going for. And when you play a game quickly and you're just watching it, you don't get to see all the fun ideas, especially the lines that they don't go for. So when we're thinking back with pawn to h3, right? Why didn't Jean Defresne just play pawn to h3 and save his pawn, right? If we're going through that game quickly, we would think that he just kind of messed up. But instead, by going through that move and say, why didn't he do that? We got to see a few more tactics that could have been played. So I hope you found this interesting. Adolf Anderssen is one of those old-time chess players, right up there with Paul Morphy, who has some great tactical ideas and very creative wins.